The next section we'll talk about are vestibular success criteria. And these next few sections will be a little bit smaller with 1 or 2 success criteria in them, but no less important. Vestibular is more than balance. The vestibular system includes parts of the inner ear and brain that process sensory information involved with controlling balance and eye movements. If a disease or injury damages these processing areas, an individual may suffer with disorders of dizziness or balance. Some of the symptoms of a vestibular issue may include, but are not limited to, imbalance or unsteadiness, vertigo, spinning or whirling sensation, dizziness, lightheadedness, a rocking sensation, blurry or bouncing vision, nausea, or hearing changes. Animation from interactions is an important new vestibular success criteria. Now this one is flagged as level 3A, which actually is a little bit of a reach, but is one that we have included after careful consideration and discussion with our Octode leadership. We want the ability to minimize the impact of animation on folks who may have vestibular issues. We also want to honor users' preference for animation. So any animation that is triggered by a user interaction, a button click, scrolling, tapping, touching, any animation like that, unless it is essential to functionality or information being conveyed, users should have the ability to turn that animation off. And if you're now, we don't want to discourage teams from designing with animation. We do want to consider the less is more principle. We want to ask, is animation warranted for this design? Is it essential to gather users' attention, to convey a message? We want to make sure animations do not include strong flashes or strobing effects. We want to honor users' preference for reduced motion. There are ways for front-end engineers to use JavaScript to check the window object and ask, does the user have a prefers reduced motion setting enabled? If they do, we would like to ultimately be able to disable animation, use that as a conditional media query in our CSS, for instance. Next section is color contrast success criteria. WCAG 2.0 has had a color contrast for text elements and their backgrounds. WCAG 2.1 takes that a step further and includes a color contrast requirement for non-text elements. This can apply to things like user interface components, graphical objects, charts, backgrounds, dividers, and focus halos. The graphic I've presented on this page shows a light blue next to a medium blue, and the second graphic shows a light blue next to a dark blue. The first graphic has a color contrast ratio of 2.57 to 1, which does not meet the 3-to-1 success criteria threshold. The second graphic does meet that threshold because the color contrast between the light blue and the dark blue is 5.99 to 1. I should mention that all 3 of these colors were sampled and picked from our va.gov design system specifically to illustrate this point. Visual presentation of user interface components and graphic objects must have a contrast ratio of 3-to-1 against adjacent colors. So if we have a light blue and a middle blue next to each other and using those as a visual delineator between, say, an alert message and a section container or something like that, that's going to be something that we'll have to go back and rethink now with WCAG 2.1. So we encourage anyone who is working with visual design or with colors, there are many options for testing color pairs. And I've linked the Who Can Use website, also the Cluse plugin for Sketch. Stark is another popular plugin for Sketch. These are all really good resources for plugging in color values and getting contrast ratios back so we can make sure that we're compliant with this 3-to-1 success criteria. Text spacing success criteria is the next one. This is a personal favorite of mine. It goes way back to design school and typography. Ultimately, the web is text. So let's do our part to keep it readable. WCAG 2.1 adds specific requirements around text and typography that says users must be able to adjust text spacing in 4 key areas. Users should be able to add their own CSS or their own style sheet for line height. So I could increase the leading between each of these lines if I was having trouble reading them. If I wanted to increase spacing after a paragraph, I should be able to do that. If I wanted to space letters farther apart or make them closer together, typographers call this tracking. I should be able to adjust that. And word spacing. If I want to increase the space between word and spacing or letter and spacing and tracking, I should be able to do that as well. The good thing is, by default, all of these things are available to users. Browsers allow users to set their own style sheet that takes precedence over an application style sheet and let users change these things. There are also things we can do while designing new products to make sure that we're meeting users where they are. And we always encourage teams to design headings and paragraphs with good spacing. If there's a warranted need or there's a precedent, using our utility classes to increase leading. As line length gets longer, more leading is always a preferable scenario, and not including real specific things in our style sheets like important tags, especially in inline styles. If we do that, then we'll have to call that out as a 1.4.12 success criteria violation, because anything that uses an important tag in an inline style tag is going to defeat the user style sheet and is going to take the power away from users to redefine how they want text to be presented. Next one is keyboard success criteria. And this specifically is around keyboard shortcuts. Now, some websites like Gmail and GitHub have implemented keyboard shortcuts to let users navigate. And these are kind of lesser known features, but they're pretty cool. For instance, if I press J in Gmail, if I'm looking at a message, J will open the next oldest message. If I press K, it will open the next newest message. In GitHub, just recently, it was brought to my attention, if I'm in a GitHub repo and I press the period key, it will open a VS Code editor. Now, these are all really powerful features and really speed up the process, or speed up processing and speed up interaction for folks who prefer to navigate with a keyboard. However, with that in mind, there are certain rules that we must follow when we want to add keyboard shortcuts to our applications. Shortcuts like the enter or the space key should only be active when an element has keyboard focus. This is how buttons and links behave by design. A button or link can only be activated when it is the element under focus. If you implement custom keyboard shortcuts, there needs to be a way to turn them off. And we should consider remapping shortcuts. If your shortcut is the K key or the L key, can it be remapped to Option plus L? This is really important for assistive technology users, especially JAWS and NVDA screen readers. Both of those assistive devices map pretty much every letter key and a number of the number keys and even some of the function keys to assistive tech menus, to ways to navigate and to interact with the web page. So if we have our own custom shortcuts trying to override that, we could end up with collisions and a very difficult, if not confusing, experience for part of our audience. And we want to make sure we're avoiding that. All right, that is the last success criterion to talk about, and I'm really right on time. I'm not going to claim that I planned that, but we are at the question and answer section. So I will take a pause and ask if anyone has questions or comments they would like to make.
Trevor, it looks like Shauna posted a question in the chat if you want to check it out.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Trevor, for some of these things that are like clearly more design system component stuff, like let's say we our paragraph spacing just isn't right. Like, is that the kind of thing that the design system team and Natalie is going to be like auditing? Are they going to be auditing the design system for these new requirements? Or is it the kind of thing that a front end team would make an experiment and like propose the experimental system with?
That's a fantastic question, Shauna, and I'm really glad you brought it up. So this is going to be kind of a winding answer, but I hope it gets to the heart of what you're asking. In the presentation tomorrow, when I'm talking about how we will actually test for these, some of these success criterion will be flagged as design system items. Like there are things that we will handle in the design system. They've either been cataloged already as improvements we need to make in the design system, and I've got them in our accessibility work backlog. As product teams are working along, if they come upon a situation where the design system has not been updated to meet these new success criterion, yeah, then I would encourage an experimental design system workflow to close that gap as well.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
Excellent question. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just now getting back and seeing some of the comments from earlier. I have a habit when I'm presenting that I usually keep the chat closed because I'll inevitably start looking at it instead of keeping my train of thought, what I was supposed to be discussing. I'm not hearing any other questions or not seeing anything in our chat. Anything, Cheryl, was that a sufficiently long, awkward silence?
Yeah, I think you hit it. We, if nobody has any other questions, Trevor, do you just want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I am perfectly good with that. The slide deck that has been published and linked out on our scroll point or our public
website.
Thank you, on our platform website includes most of these resources. A couple of the resource links I added just this morning as I was doing a final pass through, specifically around the technical requirements or the technicals of respecting prefers reduced motion with JavaScript, and a link to Mozilla Developer Network around prefers reduced motion. I will get the deck updated and a new resource linked to. In the future, we'll also be writing out written documentation that takes what we've discussed here in the slide deck and also the speaker notes and putting them in text documentation format.
The session has been recorded, right? So you've been using that link too?
Yes, the session was recorded. Platform has a new channel on YouTube, and we are still trying to figure out how that works, but we will be publishing this video on our YouTube channel, which will be then accessible via platform website.
That is all I have. Thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon or this morning, as it were. Thank you, everyone, for attending. If you're able to attend tomorrow's session, I encourage that as well. Tomorrow, we'll get into more of the specifics around what this new foundational testing will look like, and also which groups will be responsible, if it's something that's part of foundational testing, if it's design system, if it's be on the lookout for in future work, because it's not really a thing we see yet. Yeah, so I look forward to talking about that tomorrow.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you.
Bye.